The dust rises from nowhere. A single boot heel strikes hardpan. The wind carries the scent of sage and something older, something forgotten. Listen, that sound isn't just wind. It's the absence of everything you depend on right now. No electricity humming in the walls. No GPS telling you where to go. No weather forecast warning you what's coming. No instant communication to call for help. Nothing but open sky, hard earth, and the weight of survival pressing down on your shoulders. What if I told you that people didn't just survive out here? They thrived. Not through technology or comfort, but through understanding something we've completely lost. What if the real secret to life in the Wild West wasn't about having more resources, but about losing less of them? By the end of this, you'll understand exactly how an entire civilization functioned without the safety nets we consider absolutely essential. And you might never look at your own life the same way again. The frontier wasn't some romantic adventure playground. It was a system, a brutal, elegant, unforgiving system where every decision rippled through survival itself. The settlers who understood this lived. The ones who didn't, well, their names are dust now, scattered across unmarked graves in places nobody remembers. Let's start with what seems obvious. The Wild West was harsh, brutally, impossibly harsh. But here's what most people get wrong. They imagine it as chaos, random suffering, meaningless hardship, just bad luck determining who lived and died. And yet, that's incomplete. The truth is far more interesting, and the West wasn't surviving despite its limitations. It was surviving because of how those limitations were understood and integrated into every single system. Take water. In the modern world, you turn a handle. Water appears. You never think about it. Out on the frontier, water wasn't a utility. It was the entire foundation of existence. A ranch couldn't be built anywhere. It had to be built where water could be accessed, stored, and protected. This single constraint shaped everything. Where people lived, how far they could travel, when they could plant, how many animals they could keep. Nothing worked in isolation. The location of water determined the location of the settlement. The settlement's size determined how much livestock could survive. The livestock determined food security. Food security determined population stability. One system, integrated completely. The worst part? Most settlers didn't understand this integration at first. They'd arrive with romantic notions of building anywhere, doing anything, living however they wanted. The desert didn't care about their dreams. It killed them quietly and efficiently. Thirst is a slow teacher. By the time you understand that water controls everything, you might already be dead. The ones who survived were the ones who learned to read the land like a book written in stone and sand. They looked for cottonwoods. They followed animal trails. They understood that water leaves signs if you know how to see them. But water was just the beginning. Consider the temperature. In summer, the heat could reach levels that would kill a person in hours if they weren't prepared. In winter, the cold could freeze a man solid in a single night. Modern people have thermostats. We adjust a dial. Out there, temperature wasn't something you controlled. It was something you negotiated with. You had to understand the difference between the heat of the day and the cold of the night. You had to know how to use adobe, how to position buildings to catch or avoid the sun, how to layer clothing, how to time your work around the brutal rhythm of the day. Again, nothing worked in isolation. The type of shelter you built determined how you survived temperature. The materials available determined what shelter you could build. The location of those materials determined where settlements could expand. The architecture of the frontier wasn't aesthetic. It was survival mathematics. Thick walls, small windows, orientation toward the south. These weren't choices. They were necessities encoded into every structure. A building that looked beautiful but didn't account for temperature was a tomb waiting to be filled. The real genius of frontier life wasn't in any single innovation. It was in understanding that every system had to account for loss. You couldn't prevent heat loss in winter, so you minimized it. You couldn't create water in the desert, so you captured and stored every drop. You couldn't grow food year-round, so you preserved what you had with salt, smoke, and time. The entire civilization was built on the principle of losing less, not having more. Food was perhaps the most brutal teacher of this philosophy. Modern agriculture produces abundance. We have seasons that don't matter because we have global supply chains. Out there, and you ate what you could grow or hunt in your region during your season. That was it. A failed harvest didn't mean going to the store. It meant starvation. This created an obsession with preservation that shaped every aspect of frontier culture. Smoking meat, salting fish, drying vegetables, fermenting. Every technique was about extending the life of food, about making autumn's abundance last through winter's scarcity. But here's where it gets darker. This wasn't just about technique. It was about understanding scarcity so deeply that it changed how you thought. A frontier family didn't waste. They couldn't afford to. Every scrap had value. Every animal part served a purpose. Bones became tools and broth. Hides became clothing and shelter. Sinew became thread. Organs became food. Nothing was discarded because nothing could be discarded. The waste we produce today would have seemed like insanity to them, like burning money in front of starving people. The psychological weight of this can't be overstated. Imagine living every single day knowing that one bad decision could kill you. One failed crop, one lost animal, one miscalculation about water, one wrong turn in a storm. The margin between survival and death was measured in days, sometimes hours. This created a different kind of human, not necessarily better or worse, but fundamentally different. Risk assessment wasn't theoretical, it was visceral. You felt it in your bones. Consider travel. Today, we think nothing of driving across the country. We have maps, GPS, fuel stations, hotels, emergency services. A frontier traveler crossing the same distance faced something entirely different. The journey could take weeks. You had to carry everything you needed: water, food, tools, weapons, shelter. Your horse or wagon had limits. You couldn't just go anywhere. You had to follow established routes where water was known, where terrain was manageable, where other travelers had already proven passage was possible. This shaped the entire geography of the frontier. Towns didn't appear randomly. They appeared at specific points, where water was reliable, where terrain allowed passage, where natural resources existed. The routes between towns became lifelines. Deviating from them meant risking everything. And yet, people did deviate. They had to. The frontier expanded because people were willing to take those risks, to venture into unknown territory, to potentially die in the attempt. The ones who survived weren't always the smartest or strongest. They were the ones who understood systems well enough to know what risks were worth taking and which ones were suicide. Communication was another system that shaped everything. You couldn't call ahead. You couldn't send an email. News traveled at the speed of a horse, sometimes slower. This meant that decisions had to be made with incomplete information. A rancher deciding whether to move his herd had to guess at conditions ahead. A family deciding whether to attempt a journey had to rely on rumors and hope. The entire frontier operated in a fog of uncertainty that we can barely imagine today. And yet, systems emerged to handle this. Trading posts became information hubs. Travelers shared news. Newspapers, when they existed, were weeks or months old, but still valuable. People developed networks of trust. You knew certain merchants, certain guides, certain routes. You operated within those networks because stepping outside them meant entering the unknown. The frontier wasn't lawless chaos. It was a complex web of relationships and understandings that allowed people to function despite the absence of modern communication. Law enforcement was perhaps the starkest example of how the frontier operated with minimal infrastructure. There were no police on every corner, no cameras, no instant communication to report crimes. Justice was often local, sometimes brutal, sometimes absent entirely. This created a different kind of social order. Communities had to police themselves. Reputation mattered intensely because it was often your only currency. A man known as honest could get credit. A man known as a thief couldn't. The system wasn't perfect, far from it. But it functioned because people understood that their survival depended on maintaining social bonds. Medicine was another frontier system that operated on principles we've abandoned. There were no hospitals, no antibiotics, no x-rays. A serious injury or illness could be fatal. Frontier medicine was practical, often brutal, always desperate. Amputation to prevent infection, cauterization to stop bleeding, herbal remedies based on generations of trial and error. Midwives delivering babies with no backup plan if something went wrong. The mortality rate was staggering by modern standards. And yet, people survived, not through advanced technology, but through understanding anatomy, through experience, through acceptance of risk. The worst part of frontier medicine wasn't the lack of technology. It was the knowledge that you were on your own. If infection set in, you couldn't call an ambulance. If complications arose during childbirth, there was no emergency room. You had to make decisions, knowing that the wrong choice meant death. This created a different relationship with the human body, less abstract, more immediate, more honest about vulnerability. Energy was perhaps the most fundamental system of all. We think of energy as electricity, as something that flows from a wall. Frontier energy was muscle, human muscle, animal muscle. Fire, that was it. Every task had to be evaluated through the lens of available energy. Could you do it with your own strength? Could you use a horse or ox? Could you use fire? If none of those worked, it didn't get done. This created an efficiency that's almost impossible to imagine today. Every movement had to count. Every tool had to justify its weight and effort. Lighting was a perfect example. At night, you had darkness, or you had fire. Candles were expensive. Oil lamps were better, but still consumed resources. Most frontier people went to bed when the sun went down and woke when it rose. Their entire schedule was dictated by the sun. Work happened during daylight. Rest happened at night. This wasn't laziness or lack of ambition. It was acceptance of a fundamental constraint. You couldn't fight the sun. You could only work within its rhythm. Cooking was another energy calculation. You needed fire to cook, to heat water, to stay warm. Fire required fuel. Fuel had to be gathered, stored, protected from weather. In areas with trees, this was manageable. In areas without trees, it was a constant struggle. Cow dung was burned for fuel in some regions, dried grass, anything that would burn. The act of cooking wasn't just about preparing food. It was about managing a precious resource. Meals were planned around fuel availability. Cooking methods were chosen based on efficiency. Nothing was wasted. The frontier operated on a principle that we've completely abandoned. Everything has a cost, and that cost must be understood and accepted. Modern life obscures these costs. We pay a bill and electricity appears. We don't see the coal mines or the power plants or the environmental damage. We see only convenience. The frontier made costs visible and immediate. You wanted light? You had to gather fuel and tend a fire. You wanted to travel? You had to prepare for weeks and risk your life. You wanted to eat well? And you had to work the land and manage resources carefully. This created a different kind of decision-making. People on the frontier couldn't afford to be wasteful or careless. Every choice had consequences that rippled through their survival. This wasn't just about individual responsibility. It was about understanding that you were part of a system, and that system was fragile. One person's carelessness could endanger an entire community. A fire left unattended could burn down buildings. A broken tool could mean the difference between eating and starving. This created a culture of care and attention that seems almost alien to us now. And here's the part that still gets me. Despite all this hardship, despite the constant danger and uncertainty, people found meaning out there. They built communities. They celebrated. They created art and music and stories. They fell in love and raised families. They didn't just survive. They lived. They found beauty in sunsets over endless plains. They found pride in building something with their own hands. They found connection in shared struggle. The frontier wasn't just about survival. It was about what humans are capable of when everything is stripped away except necessity and will. The Wild West teaches us something we've forgotten. It teaches us that comfort isn't the same as happiness, that convenience isn't the same as meaning, that having everything doesn't necessarily mean having what matters. The frontier operated on principles of integration, of understanding systems, of accepting limits and working within them. We've abandoned those principles. We've built a world where we try to have everything, where we try to transcend every limit, where we obscure the costs of our choices. But the frontier is still there in the land. The same sun rises and sets. The same wind blows across the same plains. The same water flows in the same places. And sometimes, when you stand in that landscape and feel the weight of it, you understand something that the settlers understood. You understand that you're not separate from these systems. You're part of them. And the only way to truly live is to understand that integration, to accept those limits, and to work within them with intention and care. The frontier is gone, but its lessons remain. And if you want to understand what it really means to be human, to understand what we've gained and what we've lost in our rush toward convenience, you have to go back to that dust, that wind, that endless sky. You have to imagine yourself standing there with nothing but what you can carry, nothing but your wits and your will. And then you have to ask yourself, what would you do differently? What would you value? What would actually matter? If you want more stories about the systems that built civilizations, about the forgotten wisdom hidden in history, about what the past can teach us about surviving the future, subscribe. Because every week we dig deeper into the mysteries that shaped the world we live in today.
To accept those limits and to work within them with intention and care.